Hi and welcome to my new swiftui course entirely focused on animations. So this is the app that we're going to build. One of the new things that we see a lot in iOS development is animated icons. You can see this hamburger menu that is changing, as well as when I select here, each of these icons become animated. And if we go back, we can go to this other screen that we're going to build. And now we see a beautiful background animation using shapes and blur, as well as a button animation. And here using a form, we're going to have a loading. Then if we enter something, it's going to load and have a success animation with confetti. Finally, when we go back, we have this tab bar animation using icons that are also animated, and that really makes your app design stand out more. So what is really surprising about this is that we're using animated assets, which means that these icons animations are not made in code. They're made in Rive, which is a really cool animation tool that lets you create animated assets for your website, iOS and Android apps. Now, Rive has an editor which lets you animate all of these shapes and icons separately by yourself or within a team environment, so you can collaborate in real time just like Figma. What really sets Rive apart from other tools such as Lottie is that you can use artboards, which means that with a single asset, you can target multiple icons. For example, the tab bar and the sidebar is using a single asset, and you can see the file name that is the same, yet the artboard name changes. On top of having multiple artboards, you can have multiple animations, and using those animations, you can set a state machine. Now, what is a state machine? Essentially, you can compose your animation flow and then set values such as Boolean and numbers and triggers, which then flow by using conditions, and those are affected by these values. Now you might guess this is very similar to code, and that's the beauty because you can synchronize with swiftui states. So in this case, for example, I can sign in and it checks the login function. If it's empty, it's going to set the error, but otherwise it's going to set the check animation as well as trigger the confetti explosion. This course is sponsored by Rive, which means it's entirely free. You can share that with your friends and they can watch the entire thing. We're going to learn how to build the entire app from scratch. That includes having a custom layout, a custom font, a sidebar, as well as a custom modal with animated assets and all the animations in between. I'm going to provide the full design in Figma so that you can inspect and check the typography, the colors, and the assets. Everything is in layers, including the app icon, and we also have the assets that we have to plan so that we can export these as SVG. Then in Rive, I'm going to show you how to import the shapes, set the animation from scratch, create the timeline and work with the different animation timings, then create new animations. And with those animations, we're going to learn how to compose the state machine. So I'm going to help you every step of the way. Then, of course, the main thing is the app itself. We're going to use those animated assets, and we're going to set the layout, the icons, the colors, as well as the states, so that we can create all the effects, play the animations with delay, set the input back and forth using that state machine. So it's a full course. Even if you've never done Rive or Xcode, you will be able to follow as long as you know a little bit about HTML, CSS, or about animations and UI design. So I hope you're excited to learn all of these beautiful techniques. Rive has a community where people post their own assets, and this is really cool because you can open them and then check the content and the techniques, such as here we have the different animations as well as the state machine. This is important because you need to know these names in order to implement that in swiftui. Keep in mind that if you only open a copy of someone else's file, you will be able to edit, but at the same time, you won't be able to save the changes. If you want to have your own copy, you can go to download for newest runtime. Then once you have an account, you're going to be able to import that file and edit and save as you wish. So you can browse by icons or state machine, And in fact, we're using some of these assets. To give you some example, we have this icon sets. Again, we can use them separately by artboards. And then we have this one that we're actually using in the app. Just like the Figma community, this will grow over time and you will be able to use them or create your own from scratch, which we also teach in this course. So in order to follow this course, you're going to need to create an account, and you can sign up using an email or using your Google or Facebook accounts, which is super fast. Once you're logged in, you're going to go to editor, and this is where you're going to find your files. Then you can drag and drop the Rive file, and then if you open it, it's going to allow you to edit your own copy and make changes to it. Make sure to download the assets file, and this is where you're going to find the Figma file as well as the assets for the Xcode project, the fonts, the Rive assets, the SVG to create from scratch, and of course the Xcode project, either the final or for each section of the course. So you're going to need to install Xcode 13 and open it. Next, let's create a new project, iOS app. The product name, we're going to name it Animated. The theme is only necessary if you want to test it on a device. The organization is going to be your domain name in reverse, so io.designcode. Interface swiftui, language Swift, and tap Next. Finally, create. So let's double click here and maximize the window. We're going to go to the assets catalog, and this is where you can set the colors and the app icon. But here we have our own assets. So we're going to go to the assets folder, and first we're going to delete the default ones, and we're going to drag and drop these folders here to the assets catalog. And this is where we have already the accent color as well as the app icon. Some of the assets such as the avatar, the backgrounds, the colors, icons, etc. Then from the assets, we're going to go back and drag and drop Rive assets right next to assets. And this is where in Xcode, you need to set copy items if needed, create groups, and check add to targets. Then click finish. So these are the animated assets for the app that we're building. You can also download the Rive files from the community and drag and drop in this folder. And to implement, we're going to go to Content View. Now Rive has its own iOS library that supports the new SPM as well as swiftui, which is super useful because it makes the code so much shorter and easier to implement. So you're going to need the URL right here and go back to Xcode, click on File, Add Packages, and enter the URL in the top right. Once you have that, select Rive iOS and add package, then add package again. So that's it. Now we're ready to implement the animated assets. We're going to go to Content View, then right click on it because we're going to create a new file, and it's going to be a swiftui view. Let's create the onboarding view. So now I can just resume the preview and disable the inspector to have more space. I'm also going to change the device to be iPhone 13. And to make the animated asset work, all I need to do is to import the library. So import Rive runtime. Now to run the animation, I'm going to replace the text by Rive view model, parentheses, file name, and the one that I want to use, it's part of the folder. It's called shapes. And if I want to render the view, don't forget to add dot view parentheses. Now, if you resume and you click play, you're going to see the animation from your Rive asset, which is really cool. And that's all you need to do. And then we can treat it just like any view. So we can change the frame or ignore the save area so that it takes the full space, including the notch and the home indicator areas. We can also apply any effect such as blur. I'm going to set the radius to 30. Now it looks like this. Then add a background. And here I'm going to use the image asset from my assets catalog. So the image name is spline. Then I'm also going to set a blur radius of 50 on this one and move it a little bit by using offset. So X 200, Y 100. And there you go, we already have the background, it's animated, and those shapes have been created in Rive. So what we're going to design now is very typical in the design process, which you're going to have a bunch of shapes and they're all in vectors, and you want to be able to export them to another tool And in this case, we're going to import those in Rive. I'm sure you've seen a lot of these blurred backgrounds, and what is interesting about them is that they mostly use shapes that are blurred in different colors using gradients and blending mode. It's really cool, it's not too distracting, and it's very easy to achieve. So we're gonna go to Assets, and here I prepared these very basic shape that you can draw from scratch in most design tools. And feel free to use your own shapes. So for example, if you want to use a square or a triangle without rounded corners, you can do so with your own colors as well. And for each of them, you want to be able to select all and export to SVG. Now in Rive, we're going to create a new file. And here we're going to set the dimension of an iPhone. And since it's working with vectors, you don't necessarily need to have the exact dimension. So for example, you can take the iPhone 13 mini instead of the Pro Max version. So I'm just gonna go with 375, 812, and then create. So this is your artboard. If you work with design tools, the UI is very familiar. Then what we're gonna do here is to go to the SVG folder to find the SVG files. So I'm gonna drag and drop to Rive, and when you import those shapes, they all create their own artboards, and we don't want that. I'm just gonna copy each of these shapes and paste them to the main artboard. Once that is done, we can just delete the other artboards as we don't need them anymore. Now we're gonna focus back on the main one. Before moving on, let's just rename the file itself. Double click on the title. I'm gonna set it to shapes. And likewise for the artboard, you can set it to shapes or main. It is especially important if you have multiple artboards, but in this case, we only have a single one. Also, when you select the artboard, you have the option to set the background to hidden. Now for any animation, we have two states. We have the beginning state as well as the end state. For now, we're gonna set the beginning state, and you can just drag them roughly where I have them. The circle is gonna be here. To start animating in Rive, we're going to switch to the animate mode. So here we have the bottom area where you can create multiple animations. Now we have a default one, animation 1, and then we have the timeline editor. So let me zoom out a little bit to see the artboard in full. Then we're going to set the duration of the animation. Now if you press space, it's only going to show you 1 second, and here you can see we have 60 frames in that second. So we can adjust that by clicking on the timing and set the duration to 5 seconds instead. Then let's move the keyframe back to 0. And using this slider here, we can set the workspace to take the full 5 seconds. Now this is where we can start animating. Let's click on the triangle, and of course we can name each of these shapes. So this is going to be hexagon. And the ellipse is already good. We're going to click back the triangle. Now, if you want to have the exact same animation that I have, I'm going to set the position to 177 and 605. So notice these blue diamonds. And when they show, it means that those properties are going to be animated. So for the triangle, I'm going to animate the position and the rotation as well. If you open this arrow right here, you're going to see that I can edit them in my timeline. So we have these 3 keyframes at the beginning, and now we're going to move the timing to the end, which is at 5 seconds, and we can edit the position. So 360 by Y250 and rotation 180. Once we have this, and when you press space, you can see that it starts to animate using those values, the position and the rotation. So this is fine if you have an animation that goes one time, but if you want to loop, we should move these 3 frames at the middle of the time. And since we want to come back to the initial position, we're going to select these 3 keys using Command C and go to the end and Command V. So now when I press space, it's going to go back and forth. Keep in mind that you don't need to open this if you don't want to control each of those properties separately. So to keep things simple, we're going to close it. And now we're going to deal with the other shapes. So let's go to the hexagon. What I'm going to do differently is that instead of going back and forth, I'm going to move it from a hidden position, go here, and then it's going to loop back to this initial position and go here again. So let's go back to 0, and I'm going to set the X to 522, Y 360, rotation 0. Then at 225, I'll set 188, then 628, and rotation 0. At 5 seconds, I'm going to set -106, 440, and rotation 60. So pressing play, you're going to see that it starts hidden and it goes to hide again. But before that, it bounces from the middle. Let's repeat roughly the same step for the circle. I'm going to select, set the position at 0 to 510, 680. This time, instead of just animating the rotation, I'm going to animate the scale. So we're going to edit the scale, but before that, we're going to set the aspect ratio. So setting 206 here, it's going to apply to both X and Y. Then let's say at 134, set the scale at 176, and the position is going to be 170 by 630. Then I'm going to go to 428 roughly and set it smaller to a scale of 57%. Then -123, Y 313. So pressing play here is going to go to the end, and pressing play again, it's going to start the animation. As you can see, all of this is completely up to you, and you don't need to use exactly the same values that I have. And you can play with where you want a keyframe to be. If you set it here, then it means that this portion, it's not going to move at all. You can also move the middle keyframe and play with your own shapes as well as colors and timing. But for now, I want to keep it super basic, super simple, so that you don't feel discouraged to create your own design and animation. Right now, if you preview, it does a one-shot animation, but you can also set it to loop so that when you press play, it's going to loop the animation and go back automatically. At this point, you want to use your animation for your app or website. So we're going to export the file and click on the share icon and go to download for newest runtime. So going back to Xcode, we've already implemented the shape animation, and you can see that it looks great. So you can see that Rive is a really powerful tool. It has its own editor. Unlike Lottie, you don't need to use After Effects and go through a very complex workflow. And on top of that, they have libraries for all of these platforms, including Android and iOS, as well as for the web. And let's not forget that if you have a team of designers, you can collaborate, which works across platforms, so for Windows as well. Now we're going to take a look at this simple button animation, and you can see that we have multiple things going on. First of all, we have the scale, but also we have the crop animation on the border. Going to the Figma file, you can see that we have 3 elements, including the shape here, the border, as well as the rectangle. So we're going to select all 3 of them and then export to SVG. Now going back to the editor, we're going to create a new file, set the width to 236 and the height to 64. Create. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, then I'll drag and drop the 3 SVGs. Awesome. Let's zoom out a little bit, and we're going to bring that to the main artboard again. So copy and then paste, copy, paste, and finally copy and paste again. Let's delete these artboards and focus back on the main artboard. So the new file is going to be named button, and the artboard, let's set it to main. The shape, I'll set it to shape, then rectangle, and then we have the border. Let's set the order properly. So the border is at the very top and the shape is at the bottom. For the rectangle and the border, I'm gonna move it to the bottom right. Then selecting the artboard, we're gonna hide the background. Like this, it's going to be transparent, just like a button should be. So now we're ready to animate the whole thing. We're gonna switch to animate mode, and now we have the timeline. The duration is set properly to 1 second. Typically, a button animation is somewhere between 0.5 and 1 second. Here, the goal is when we press, it's going to scale down a little bit to give the impression that we're pushing button like on a keyboard. And finally, we'll animate the border using crop. We're also going to look at the animation timing. Now we're going to start with the scale animation on the rectangle. Starting at 100%, let's set the aspect ratio, and we're going to set these blue diamonds next to scale. Then at 10, this is the first effect of the press. Let's change the scale to 86%. Then at the end, we're going to set it back to 100. Now pressing space is going to play, and you can see that it's a linear animation. So you can make it a little bit more interesting by setting the animation timing here. By default is linear, but you can set it to cubic. Let's play, and you can see that it has a little bit of ease in and out. So if you want to learn more about animation timing, specifically the numbers that compose that, you can go to cubicbezier.com, and here we have the ease in out, which is the same S shape. So if you compare it to a linear animation, which looks like this, and press go, you can see that it's slightly different. And of course, you can customize the animation timing, such as this one, which bounce back a little bit, and you can preview it like this. So the number that we have here can also be entered in this space. If you work with CSS animation, they also have timing curve as well as swiftui. Another thing to keep in mind is that right now, when you select the whole shape, it's going to apply to all of the keyframes, but you can also choose to have different timing for each of these keyframes. But for now, let's keep it simple. We're going to keep the default ease in out, and it looks a little bit like this. Next, we're going to select the shape, and we'll scale it to move it a little bit behind the main rectangle. So setting these diamonds here for both scale and position. Going back to 0 second, I'm going to set the diamonds for position and scale. Then at 10, I'm going to resize it to 65% and move it to 54 and 36. So hidden from the rectangle. Then let's copy and paste the first frame and put that at the very end. Let's select the main shape and set the cubic. Now let's talk about clipping, because just like in Figma, you're gonna need a layer that is going to serve as a mask. So we're gonna press R and create a rectangle the same size as the border. Make sure to go back to the first frame. Now this rectangle, we're gonna call it clip. Now let's set the fill to 0% so that it's invisible. And then we're gonna go to the border, and this is where we're gonna scroll. In the inspector, right next to clipping, we're gonna click on the plus sign. And here, it's gonna ask you to pick a shape to use as a clipping source, and we're gonna select the clip. As a result, you're gonna see this clip added. Now we're gonna go back to clip, and when I resize the clip layer, you can see that it's masking the border. Now I'm gonna go back to the scale for the clip, turn off aspect ratio because I only want to change the width itself. Let's scroll back to the top, and I'm gonna change the scale to 0%. So now the width is 0, which means that it's not gonna show anything for the border. And I'm gonna start this animation at frame 20, then move the time at frame 45, and this is when I'm gonna put back the scale for the X to 104%. Just make sure that it's big enough to show the border itself. Now dragging the timeline, you can see that the button is pressed, and then the clip animation starts. We can also make it disappear at the very end by clicking on the border, and at frame 45, I'm going to set the diamond on opacity for the layer. Then at the end, I'm gonna set it to 0%. Now deselecting everything, the final animation should look like this. Back in Xcode, let's implement the button. So let's put everything inside a Z-stack. So command click on Rive View Model, embed in Z-stack. Then right after it, let's type Rive View Model, parentheses file name, and this one is button. Then let's not forget to set it as a view. Now I already imported my version of the file from the assets, but if you have made changes to the design, feel free to drag and drop your own button and replace the existing one. Now if we play this, you can see that we have the button. And when we tap on it, nothing happens. That's because we need to learn how to trigger it. So first of all, let's set the styling. I'm going to set the frame to a width of 236 and a height of 64. And then on top of it, I'm going to set an overlay using a label, which is going to use a title and system image so that I can use an SF symbol. And it's going to say start the course. The system image is from SF symbol, so it's going to be arrow forward. So SF symbol is a collection of more than 3,000 icons that you can use. It's provided by Apple, and you have multiple variations in terms of rendering, color, background, as well as the line width or fill. So there's a downloadable app, and you can search for whatever icon, such as arrow, and the one that we're using is called arrow forward. In Xcode, since the text is not exactly in the middle of the asset, I'm going to set the offset X4 and Y4. Then I'll change the font style to headline. Now let's deal with the animation. So we want to be able to tap on this and it runs the animation called active. In order to do that, we need to first declare the Rive asset at the very beginning. So let button is equal to Rive view model, parentheses, the file name is button. As a result, we can replace this Rive view model code by just button because we have declared it earlier. Now this is a view, but we can also use this to trigger animations. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new on-tap gesture, and at this point we can set button.play, and the animation name inside the parentheses is going to be active, just the way we set it in Rive editor. Now it's going to complain that since the method is using throw, it needs to be marked with try. So to make sure that we're handling the error, just make sure to add try ? Before. Now let's resume this, and when I tap, you can see that the animation is playing. It's beautiful. Another thing that we can do is to add a drop shadow. Since it's a Rive asset, we're going to cheat a little bit, and by that I mean that we're going to add a background modifier, and it's simply going to be a color.black, and then I'm going to try my best to replicate the shape and blur. Now the corner radius is going to be 30, and we're going to add a blur modifier of 10. Let's just set the opacity to 0.3, and we can move the drop shadow a little bit by using offset Y of 10. So again, all we needed to do was to create a rectangle shape with corner radius, and it's black, and we're adding a blur as well as opacity and offset. Now in swiftui, if you want to organize your code, you can definitely put them into sections. So for example, this is the background. I'm going to cut this and name this background. It's not declared yet. So right after body, double click on the curly braces, and at the very end, after it, we're going to set var background of type SumView, curly braces, and paste the view model. Let's scroll back, and we're going to resume. Sometimes to refresh the preview, you might need to press space and delete, and it's going to reset your preview and animations, which is really useful when you're testing those. Now again, I press on it. It does this beautiful animation that we just created from scratch. I hope you enjoyed it. In this part, we're going to learn how to set custom fonts. When you're designing your app, you have your text styles, and typically we try to follow as much as possible the iOS dynamic type that you can find in the iOS Human Interface Guideline in typography. And for the style, we have typically the large title, title 1 to 3, headline, etc. And also, it adjusts automatically depending on the accessibility settings. And that's exactly what we want to do with our custom fonts. Now, if you're not familiar with this, you should definitely download the iOS UI kit in the design resources from Apple. And they have for Sketch and XD, but also in the Figma community, you can search for iOS UI kit. Then you'll find the one from Joey Banks, and it has a lot of the same design system. Now the custom fonts that we're using is going to be on fonts.google.com. And of course you can use your own fonts, but the ones that I'm using is called Poppins for the title. And here I'm going to click on it. I only need one single style, which is the bold version. Make sure to select this style, and it's going to add to your list. The second font, going back to home, search for Inter. Click on it, and we're going to use two styles, which is the regular version as well as semi-bold. Once that's done, you're going to have these two fonts with the styles. I don't really suggest to download more than you need because it can definitely affect your app size. So you're going to download the fonts. It's going to give you all of the font files. You can definitely just use the ones that you need, such as Inter, regular, and semi-bold, as well as pop-in bold. Now, lucky for us, I already prepared all of this for you. You don't need to go through that step. You can just go to the fonts folder and drag and drop the fonts folder into your navigator. And this is where you're going to put copy items if needed, create groups, as well as add to targets, and then finish. So opening this, you're going to see these three fonts that we need. The second step, we need to go to the project settings, and inside targets animated, I'm going to go to info. So this is where you set some of your app properties. And now we're going to add custom fonts to the list. So first of all, next to bundle name, I'm going to click on this tiny plus sign and then type fonts provided by application. Once you have that, you have this little arrow that you can open. So for item 0, this is where we're going to reference every single font file that we're using. So item 0, the string, and the first font is inter-regular.ttf. So this name is case sensitive, so it's very important that it has exactly the same name here plus the file extension. So let's add more by clicking on the plus sign next to item 0 and another one. So we have item 1 and 2. For item 1, I'm going to set inter-semibold.ttf, then poppins-bold.ttf. Now we can close this, and you can see that this has been added to the navigator. So if you want to go back to those custom properties, we can have this shortcut. Now let's go back to onboarding view and start testing the new fonts. Let's command click on button, and we're going to put that inside a VStack. And right before the button, we're going to set a text element. It's going to say learn, design, and code. You can definitely resume the preview, and then we're going to set a dot font. Normally we can just set dot large title, and it's going to look roughly like this. But now instead of large title, we're going to set custom. And here we're going to use the custom size relative to. For the name, we're going to set Poppins bold. So we don't need the dash, and instead we're using a space. And for the size, we're going to set it to 60. And it's going to be relative to large title. So what this means is that it's going to try to scale based on the accessibility settings similar to the large title. So we can see now we have this beautiful custom fonts. It's working properly, and it also scales with dynamic type. Let me just set the frame with a width of 260, and I'm going to align that to leading, which is the left. Now let's add a second text. So let's go back to Figma, and I'm going to copy this text right here. Then after the first text, I'm going to set the text element, pasting that long description. Now normally you would have to always set a font with custom and the name and the size as well as relative, but we want to make it shorter. So short in fact that it should look very similar to how Apple is using it, so dot body or dot headline. So this is really ideal and short, and I'm going to show you how to do it yourself using your custom fonts. First of all, we're going to create a new file. So Command N, swiftui view, custom font, create. Now this is not a view, so we can delete this code. And we're going to create a custom modifier. So struct custom font of type view modifier, curly braces, and we can just type body, and it's going to autofill this very useful code. It creates a function, gives us the content, and we can use that. So content.font, So the same way that we did for the title, it's going to be .custom. The name this time is inter regular, the size 17 relative to body. Now, if I want to use my custom font view modifier, I will do something like .modifier custom font, parentheses. But this is not what we want. It's not short. We actually want to have our custom modifier name. So we're going to go back to custom font and we're going to create an extension to view, curly braces, func, and the name of our custom modifier, which is going to be custom font, camel case, parentheses, return some view, curly braces, and now we can call that modifier using exactly the same name with custom font. Just make sure that we're not referencing custom font with the lowercase c, and it's using the custom font view modifier here. So once we have that, we can go back and change the modifier to custom font. And now it achieves exactly the same result. But we want to make it even more customizable, just like the real thing. So font.body.headline, and it should be just as easy as this. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Let me delete this first and go back to custom font. And now we're going to make our custom view modifier to be customizable. First, we're going to create the list of the text styles that we want to use. So we're going to use an enum for that. Enum text style, curly braces. And for each of those styles, we'll use case starting with title and then case body. So to make it simple, I'm going to start with 2 because otherwise we're going to have about 10. Next, we're going to set this customizable variable. So var text style of type text style, which is from the enum. So now it's going to be required when we call custom font. So we're going to set inside the function custom font text style of type text style. And finally, we're going to pass the text style to the view modifier. So text style, text style. So this is the basic setup. And if we go back to onboarding view, I can set text style and then body or title. But we don't want to show the text style here. We just want to show .title. To do that, we're going to go back and we can just add a little underscore for the custom font function. It's going to omit the name. So that's a really nice trick. Now I'm going to go back to custom font because it's not doing anything at all. I'm just setting the variable. It's not influencing the actual style itself. Now looking at this font modifier, specifically the custom, you can see that I have 3 values, including the name of the font, the size, and relative. So if you option click on custom, you're going to see the type of values that they have. So the first one is a string, the second one is a CG float, and finally we have the font.textstyle. So we need to set those values to be customizable. I'm going to set first var name of type string, curly braces. And the goal here is to say, okay, if it's a title or a body, then it's going to change the name of the font. So let's use a switch for that, which is kind of like an if statement, but with multiple conditions, and it's very short. So switch text style, and SwiftUI has a really good auto completion, and it's going to automatically give you all the cases for you. So in this case, we have the text style, and the first case is a title. And for that, I'm going to return Poppins bold. If it's a body, I'm going to return inter regular. So that's pretty neat. And that solves for the name. So now instead of using a hard-coded name, I'm going to replace that by name, which is what I just created right here. Next one is going to be the size. So var size of type CG float, curly braces, and again, switch text style. Using the auto completion, if it's a title, I'm going to return 28. For the body, return 17. Now I can replace size. Let's do the third one, var relative of type. If you remember, it's font.textstyle, curly braces, and again, you can guess it, switch text style auto completion for the title. So this is easy because I'm following exactly the dynamic type for iOS. So title return dot title and body return dot body. And remember, this is for relative to, and we want to scale it based on the same text styles. So now instead of dot body, I'm going to put relative, which is what I declared right here. Now this is where the magic happens. After all of this trouble that we went through in order to create our custom font, we can go back to onboarding and we can switch back and forth between title or body. Isn't that beautiful? And this is so short and so simple. Now for iOS, we have about 11 text styles here. So I'm not going to list them all and type them in front of you, but I'm going to provide the code from the text content that you can just replace all of this code after import swiftui. So let's delete this first and you can just paste the whole code. It's really exactly the same thing. So for the name, we have the different cases. And here to make things shorter, I'm just saying, okay, if it's a title, title 2, title 3, it's going to use Poppins bold, and the same for inter. Now for the size, you can see that I'm just listing the whole thing, even including subline 2, footnote 2, which iOS doesn't have. And this gives the semi-bold version, which is really useful. And finally, the relative to, again, is just following iOS. And of course, the enum, which has all of the text styles. So thanks to this, I go back to the custom font. I'm going to be able to pick exactly the font that I want. And in this case, it's going to be body. But what's beautiful about this is that this configuration is going to allow us to create the rest of the layouts and the custom fonts with minimal code. So while we're here, let's just add the third text, which is at the very bottom. I'll copy the content, and right after the button, I'm going to add text, parentheses, and that content. Now see how simple it is to set the custom font. So custom font and dot footnote. That's it. And I'm going to set an opacity of 0.7. The same for the body. I'm going to set opacity 0.7. Now I'm going to add a spacer after the text. So I'm pushing the content a little bit. And also I want to align everything to the left instead. So for the V stack, I'm going to set alignment to dot leading and the spacing 16. Now the box takes the size of the content itself. So if you don't have a lot of content, it's going to go smaller. It's pretty inconsistent depending on the layout. And if you want to be more consistent, you can add a frame and set a max width to infinity, then alignment to leading. Finally, for the V stack, I'm just going to go to the end of it and add a padding of 40, as well as another padding from the top to 40. Now the onboarding view is done, the button is working properly. In the next section, we're going to create a custom modal design. It's going to have a functional custom text field, and we're going to do the basic layout. So I'll see you then. In this part, we're going to create the sign in modal, including the basic layout with the drop shadows and the containers, as well as the custom text fields, which has an icon and it's functional. Then finally do the rest of the element, including the custom divider. Back to Xcode, we're going to create a new file, Command N, swiftui view, sign in view, create. Here we'll start with the title, and it's going to be sign in. Then we'll apply the custom font that we just created earlier. That's going to be using the large title. Next, we want to add more elements, but before that, we need to put that inside a VStack. So let's create the second text and just copy the content from here, create the text, and paste that content. Now, sometimes you're going to have extra spacing, so you need to delete those to make sure that we don't have extra lines. And this one, the custom font, is going to be headline. So before getting into the custom text field, we'll do the bottom part first. Using a divider for now, then the text underneath, text, content, paste the content. It's going to be a custom font using subheadline, and we can use the foreground color to secondary. Next, let's do the logo. So starting from the image from the assets catalog, call logo email. And there we go. Now we're going to add two more. So we're going to put that inside an H tag first, and then logo Apple, and finally logo Google. Let's use the spacer in between so that we can use the full space, and voila. So everything is already set to center by default, which is perfect and follows the design. Now we're going to take care of the container, which is the VStack, first setting the spacing to 24, and then at the very end, let's set a padding of 30. The background is going to be .regular material, which is the background blur in iOS. And then we'll create the rounded corners by using a mask with the rounded rectangle as the shape to mask it. Set to corner radius and style. It's going to be 20, and the style continuous, which is using the iOS corner radius, which is also known as super ellipse or smooth corners. Let's add some drop shadow. Shadow with more options. In my assets, I have the color called shadow, and with this color, I can set opacity 0.3. The radius is 5, x 0, and y 3. Now, a lot of designs actually use multiple drop shadows, up to 3, 4, or 5. And that adds more depth, but also more separation between the container and the background. In this case, we're going to limit to 2. So I'm going to add another one, again using the color shadow with opacity 0.3, radius 30, x 0, and y 30. So this is a much more spread out drop shadow, and it's really nice. Next, we also want to have some padding to the left and the right. So we're going to add a padding, which is a default one, and that is 16. Now, speaking about the shadow and the background material, sometimes you want to have even more definition to the borders, and for that you can also add a border. This is often seen in macOS and web, but I do want to show you how to do it. And you can see here in Figma we have the stroke using a linear gradient, so we're going to apply the same by using overlay, then use the same shape, which is the rounded rectangle with a corner radius and style 20, continuous. This shape here by default is black, so we're going to set it to a stroke instead, and this stroke will set the gradient for it. So dot linear gradient, and I'm going to use the colors option, and when you have these brackets, it means that it's an array of colors. So we'll set the first color, it's going to be white dot opacity 0.8, then comma, another color, white dot opacity 0.1. For the start point and end point, this is like the gradient in Figma, and we're going to set it to top left to bottom right. So start point, top leading, and end point, bottom trailing. Now it's barely visible. You can still see it, and it's going to be even more visible when we have the background, which is the onboarding UI. Next, we're going to take care of the custom text fields. So it's going to be before the divider, starting with the text, which is email, and I'll set the custom font to sub headline, the color using foreground color secondary. Then I'll put this together with the text field by using a VStack, because remember, each element is going to have a spacing of 24. So by putting this together with the text field, this VStack will have its own spacing between the text and the text field. Now after the text, we'll set text field, parentheses, select title and text binding. Since this is a custom text field, the title is going to be empty. And for the binding, which is the value that we're going to set as a state, we need to declare the state first. So before the body, we'll set state var email is equal to empty by default. And then while at it, we're going to set the password as well. So state var password is equal to empty by default. Now binding it to the state, we have to use a $ email. Once we have that, we can resume and play. And now we have this text field, which is functional. We just need to style it. So I'm going to start with a padding of 15. then another padding from the left using dot leading of 36. This padding here is to make sure that we can add an icon to the left. But first we need to see the background, so I'm going to set a background to white. Thanks to that, you can see that the text starts with a huge spacing to the left where we're going to put an icon. So I'm going to set the rounded corners by using mask, rounded rectangle, corner radius of 10 and style continuous. Now we can also set a border by using overlay, again using the rounded rectangle with the same style. So corner radius 10 and continuous. Then after the first parentheses, set the stroke. Now it's going to be easy to see if I set the indentation. So the rounded rectangle, and then we have the stroke. And on top of that, if I want a color, I'm going to use fill using dot black, dot opacity 0.1. So now we have a nice border. Now the only thing that's left is to add the icon. So after overlay, I'm going to set another overlay, which is an image, and it's called icon email. This image here, I just want to make sure that it's going to be aligned to the left. And to do that, I'm going to set a frame max with infinity, alignment to leading. Then add a little bit of padding to the left. So padding dot leading of 8. Perfect. Now testing my text, you can see that it has the proper spacing. As you can see, when you create custom layout, you tend to have a lot of styling that goes with it. And a really good idea is to set a reusable modifier. So for the event that you need a second text field, you can just apply a single modifier to express all of this styling. So we're going to do exactly that. First of all, we're going to cut all of these modifiers and create a new file, swiftui view custom text field create. Let's remove the layout code and set struct custom text field of type view modifier, curly braces, and again body, use autofill, and here we're going to use the content that we receive, then paste all of those modifiers that we just cut. Now remember that if we don't have the extension, we're going to need to use modifier and then the full name of the view modifier. So we're going to make it shorter by using the extension to view curly braces, then set that custom modifier name by using func custom text field camel cased, curly braces, parentheses, return some view curly braces, and now we can call that modifier using the custom text field, but with a capital C to make sure that we're referencing this one. Let's not forget the parentheses. So now going back to sign in view, we can just add that modifier dot custom text field, and it's going to apply exactly the same styling. Now I want to align the text to the left, so I'm going to use the VStack alignment to leading. And then I want to have the exact same layout for the password. So let me copy the whole VStack, including the content, and I'm going to change this to password. Now for the password, you want to use secure field instead of text field, but they are almost exactly the same thing, especially for the styling. So the difference is when you type here, it's going to show the text, and when you type here, it hides the text. Now we're not going to use the same value, so let's change this to the password state. Awesome. Next, we want to change the icon, so we have to make sure that the image here is customizable. So we're going to go back to the custom text field, and we're going to add a variable for the image. So var image of type image, and using this image, we can just replace the whole thing. So image. Now we have to pass that image here from the extension. So first, when calling the custom modifier, we're going to set an image of type image, and then passing this image to the custom view modifier. So image, image. Now, if you do it like this, the image itself is required, but you can also set a default value, which means that it wouldn't be required. So after image, equal sign, and I can put image, parentheses, icon, email. If I do that, then the custom text field doesn't require a value and it's going to default to the email. But I can also customize it by setting image parentheses icon lock. Awesome. Now all that's left is to turn this divider into a custom divider. And for that, we're going to use a text first. So text is going to be or in caps. Then using .custom font, setting it to sub headline 2. Then set the color using foreground color to black.opacity 0.3. I have my centered text. I just need 2 lines, one to the left and one to the right. And for that, I'm going to use an H tag. So embed in H tag and then use a rectangle parentheses and set the frame using a height of 1 and opacity 0.1. Now I'm just going to copy and paste the same rectangle to the right as well. And now it does the job. So that's it. I managed to recreate the same layout that we have here in Figma. In this section, we're going to learn how to create a modal transition to this sign-in view, but also we'll learn how to create a button with a specific rounded corner to the top left, as well as how to use the hex color values to make it easier to design in Xcode. And finally, we'll have the dismiss animation. Now, when you build an app, it's very important to know how to get the proper resources and know how to Google or to use Stack Overflow, especially when they're not available in vanilla SwiftUI. Here we want to create specific rounded corners. So there's an answer for this, and we can essentially take this code right here, which is essentially a shape. So let me copy this. Going back to Xcode, let's create a new file. SwiftUI view, and I'm going to put those inside a file called extensions. Let's delete the layout code, and I'm going to paste that code from the answer in Stack Overflow. Now, looking at this is simply a shape, and if you remember, when we use a mask modifier, we can use a shape, but otherwise, in the answer, we also have the extension to the view, and so we can use that and paste that right here. What this means, as we've learned before, is that this is a custom modifier that can be applied to the view, and it's the same name as what we're used to, which is corner radius. It's just adding new options specifically to the corners that we can apply to specific corners. Now with this, we can go back to the sign-in view, and now I'm going to scroll right after the VStacks. So I'm going to insert my button. It's going to be a label using title and system image, sign in, and the image is arrow.right. Now on this label, I'm going to add a padding of 20, then a frame that is using a max width infinity, so the full width, and I'll add a background that is .pink for now. We're going to deal with the color later. The text color is going to use foreground color .white. And with this, we can finally deal with the rounded corners. So I can use the corner radius, but notice that now I have this option with the corners, and this is thanks to my extension. So let's select this. The radius is 20, and the corners can be an array, so I can use brackets starting by .top right. And as a result, you can see that the rounded corner is only applied to the top right, which is really cool. And if I add a comma, I can set bottom left, and finally another comma, bottom right. So I can pick and choose which corner should be rounded. And finally, I also want to have a rounded corner, but less accentuated. Let's add another one, .corner radius using corners. This time is going to be 8, and using the square brackets only to the top left, and voila. Now let's solve the next problem, which is the color here. We want to use a hex color, and let's say we haven't set that color in the assets catalog, and that will happen often. So to make things easier, you want to be able to simply get the hex color value from Figma, copy this code right here, and apply that to Xcode. But the thing is, Xcode has those preset colors, or you can use the asset colors, and it does not support hex by default. So we need to add another script for that, and you can search again in Stack Overflow to find the answer. And here we have a really good one. So we can copy extension to the color and go back to Xcode and then go to extensions, and I'm gonna paste that code right here. So this is going to be when we're using a color, and that color can be a hex using a string value from Figma. And so we're gonna go back to sign in view. Then for the background where it says pink, I can just replace that with color, parentheses, and now I have the hex option, which is a string. So going back to Figma, I'm gonna copy this hex code, and inside quotes, I'm gonna paste that value. There you go, we have the exact color from the design. Next, I can also add a drop shadow right after the corner radius. So shadow, the color, again, I'm gonna use the hex color value, so color hex, and paste the same hex value. Then set the opacity to 0.5. For the radius, it's going to be 20, x0, and y10. Now let's not forget that the label itself is going to use the custom font to be consistent, which is headline. Next, we're going to take care of the modal animation. And to do that, we're going to go to the onboarding view. From here, we're going to present the modal. First, we're going to set a state var show modal is equal to false by default. Now, to make things a little bit easier to understand in terms of the structure, I'm going to put the content, which is the whole VStack, including the padding. So all of this cut, put content, and declare that content. So var content of type sum view, curly braces, and paste that VStack. Next, I'm going to show the modal if show modal is equal to true, curly braces, and include the sign-in view. Let's click play. And here what I want to do is when I tap on the button after 0.8 seconds, it's going to show the modal. So I'm going to go to the content to find the button, and we already have the untapped gesture. So I'm going to use this patch queue.main.async after using the deadline and execute. So the deadline is going to be .now parentheses plus 0.8 second, and execute, just press enter, and this is where we're going to change the state show modal to true. Let's not forget with animation, otherwise it's not going to show the transition. This time I'm going to use .spring to have a little bit of bouncing, so put that inside the curly braces and then scroll back at the top to apply the transition to the sign-in view. Let's add .transition, and I'm going to use .move using the edge, and here we have the option for leading, which is left, bottom, top, trailing. I'm going to use bottom. Going to the preview, you can see that the animation in doesn't work. So if you want to show this correctly, you're going to have to build this and change in the animated app. Instead of having the initial view as content view, I'm going to change that to onboarding view. And now you can build the app by using Command R. Now to test the animation, I can tap on the button and it presents correctly from the bottom. I just need to add a close button at the bottom so I can dismiss the view. Now I want to do two things. One is to add a background behind the sign-in view that dims it a little bit. And also I want to have some movement in the background while the present modal is happening. So right after content, I'm going to add color. I'm going to use shadow, and this is going to set opacity to 0.4. Then I want to ignore the save area. Let me set the indentation. For the opacity, I want this to show only when show modal is active. So show modal question mark 0.4, otherwise to 0. Then we'll move the content a little bit during the animation. So use offset, and I'm going to use the Y position, show modal question mark minus 50, otherwise 0. Testing this, you're going to see that when I press, it moves the content a little bit, and also it dims the background. Next, we're going to deal with the dismiss animation, and for that, we're going to need to add a close button at the very bottom. So going to the sign in view, let's add an overlay, then use an image system name, which is an SF symbol, and for the close button, it's an X mark. Right now, you don't see it because it's hidden by default because of this condition. So for now, we can reverse the condition. So instead of saying if show modal is equal to true, I'm going to add an exclamation point, which means if show modal is equal to false. As a result, a sign in view is going to show. Let's set the indentation for the image and set the frame to width 36 and height 36. Then set the foreground color to black and background color to white. Also, a mask using a circle, and add a drop shadow using color, shadow, then opacity 0.3, radius 5, x0, y3. To make this interactive, I'm going to put this image inside a button. So embed first, set that as a button. The first curly braces for the action, then label for the content. Now this button, I want to align this to the bottom. So right after the curly braces, I'm going to set a frame, max height to dot infinity, and alignment to bottom. Perfect. So for the button action, I'm going to dismiss the modal by setting show modal is equal to false. Let's put this inside with animation dot spring, curly braces, and put show modal is equal to false inside. Now at this point, I can definitely put back the if statement to the way it was. So if show modal is equal to true, then show the sign in view. And now I can test the animation. The animation in is not going to work properly, but animation out, the preview should work fine. We do have an issue where it goes in the back right away. And to solve that, we can add the Z index right after the overlay. So Z index to 1. And this should solve the problem. So you can see we have the dismiss animation. There's just one final thing, is that it stays at the bottom, and we can solve that by combining multiple transitions. So here we have the move transition, and right after I can also add dot combine with and dot opacity. So we're gonna have the move animation, but also it disappears using opacity. So before we finish, I'm just going to change the move animation from the top instead of bottom. And you can do so left, right. It's really easy to switch thanks to the transition. I'm going to play this and test. In the simulator, I can see the result of my work, and the animation in and out should work just fine. That's just really cool. In this part of the course, I will show you how to apply animations using Rive assets and create a loading animation, which happens a lot during a sign-in, especially when you do an API call. So it's using a state machine, and if there's nothing, it's going to give you an error. But if you enter something, it's going to show the success and also play the confetti animation. Now the assets that we're going to use are from the community, and this one has a state machine, so we have multiple states, starting with the check, so that gives the success. Then you can reset it and then go to the error. So from the same file, we can manage that and apply it in swiftui. The second thing that we're going to use is called confetti, and it only has a trigger which gives that explosion. So we're going to start with check and error. Open that in Rive. In this case, we don't need to create our own version and make modification. So we can just use a copy of the original author. And from that file, you can definitely download for newest runtime. And also you can check all the different animation names as well as state machine values so that we can apply that in swiftui. Now in next code, we're going to start with the sign-in view. And first, I'm going to import Rive runtime. And then I'm going to declare the animated asset, which is already available at the beginning of the course. So you don't need to do that yourself. But if you have your own files that you want to use, that's fine too. Let's type let check is equal to Rive view model, parentheses, we're going to set the file name, check. The state machine is called state machine 1, and these are the different states that we're going to need to remember. So state machine, which is state machine 1, and then going to the vstack, which is the container itself, I'm going to add an overlay right after padding. So overlay, and here we're going to set check.view parentheses. Now we're going to click on play, and voila, we have the loading animation. We just need to change the size a little bit. Let's set the indentation first, and I'm going to set a frame with a width of 100 and a height of 100. The second thing we need to do is to make sure that the check animation, which is an overlay, doesn't block the interaction with the content underneath. So to do that, we need to use a modifier called allows hit testing and set that to false. Now the button and the text field is going to work properly. Okay, next we want to be able to tap on the button and change the loading into a check or error. So let's scroll up a little bit to find the button, which is currently a label. I'm going to embed this inside a button and set the action first, and the label, which is the content. Now the action is going to trigger the state change in the state machine. So first I need to set my try, and then check trigger input. Here I need to remember the name of my state, which is check, and also the state machine name. With this, make sure that you press space and delete so you can refresh the animation on the right side. And when I tap on the sign in, it's going to switch to the check animation. As you can see, Rive is really powerful, and you can really compose your animations. And using the same file, you can switch between those states. Now I want to make sure that I hide the loading animation at first. I'm going to add a new state. State var is loading is equal to false by default. And using this state, I'm going to go back to the overlay and set my condition. So if is loading curly braces, and then put my view inside that. Now it's important to know that if you want to use an if statement inside an overlay, you need to wrap that inside a container first. And in this case, I'm going to put that inside a Z-stack. Next, I just need to fix my timing. So let's scroll back to the button. And here for the button action, I'm going to set is loading is equal to true when I tap on the button like this. But then after 1 second, I'm going to set to the check animation. So let me just cut this first, and I'm going to put that inside a dispatch queue.main.async after using deadline and execute. So deadline is going to be now +1, and execute, press enter, then paste the trigger input. Let's try again. I tap on sign in, it does the loading, and then after 1 second, it switches to the check animation. Awesome. What about the confetti animation? So here again, I'm going to open in Rive, and I'm going to save the asset, but also I need to check the different names. So it's the same state machine 1, and it's going to be called trigger explosion. Let's save the file. And again, we have already saved that for you, but in case you want to use your asset, feel free to do as well. And so I'm going to scroll back to the top and declare my confetti. Let confetti is equal to Rive view model, file name confetti, then comma, state machine name, state machine 1. Now I'm going to go back to the bottom to find the Z stack as well as the loading and check. But after the if statement, I'm going to set confetti.view parentheses. So this view is not going to do anything. I just need to make sure that it triggers during the button action. So right after the first dispatch queue, I'm going to set another dispatch queue.main.async after, again using deadline and execute. This time is going to be now +3 seconds. Because we want the check animation to run first, it's going to set is loading to false because we want to hide the check asset, then trigger the confetti. So try ? confetti.loading dot trigger input, and remember the name is trigger explosion, which is case sensitive, capital T and lowercase e. Then the state machine, again, state machine 1. Great. Now you can see that it's not interactive, and again, it comes down to the same problem as before. So in the confetti, we're going to set allows hit testing to false. And now we're going to press. So after 3 seconds, it's going to show the confetti. It's a little bit small, so what we can do is definitely set a scale effect to 3. Now we don't need the anchor. So this is going to make it 3 times as big. So again, after 3 seconds, it does the explosion. Next, we're going to create a proper condition so that when we have no information entered, it's going to show the error. But if we enter something, it's going to show the confetti as well as the check animation. So to do that, we're going to go back to the button action. And here, all of this code can be put into a function. Typically, you want to focus all of this portion to be about UI. And when you have functionalities that often happen in the background or API calls, you want to put that in a function separately. So I'm going to cut all of this stuff, and this new function is going to be called login camel case with parentheses. Now the function, I'm going to declare that at the very top before body. So func login camel case, curly braces, and paste all of that code. It should exactly do the same thing as before, except now we're going to set a condition. So if email, which is from the state, is not equal to nothing, then I'm going to set my success. So let's move those dispatch queues inside this. And then I'm going to set the error, which is else, then put dispatch queue dot main async after dot now plus 1 second, then execute. Try question mark, check dot trigger. The trigger is called error, and the state machine, again, the same name. So when I tab, you're going to see that it switches to error, but it's not disappearing. So after 3 seconds, I might want to make that disappear. So again, dispatch queue async after dot now plus 3, execute, press enter, then is loading is equal to false. Now this should solve the issue. So it gives the error and then it disappears. All right, so before we finish, after it's successful, we might want to dismiss the sign-in view. And remember that this is being controlled in onboarding view. It's the show modal that controls that. And as a result, we're going to bind that to a binding in sign-in view. So let's go back to sign-in view and go back to the top. And here after is loading, I'm going to set binding var show modal. We cannot have a default value, so of type Boolean. When you set a binding, it's very important to also set the default value in the preview. So let's fix that. We can also use the fix from swiftui, but sometimes it doesn't work perfectly. In this case, it has an extra comma, so we're going to need to remove that. And for the binding, we're going to use a constant that stays always the same value. And again, this is just for the preview, and it's going to set to true. Now, in order to bind show modal to the onboarding view, we're going to need to go to the sign-in view and fix whatever is missing. Again, we have an extra comma. And here we're going to use $ show modal. So now the show modal from the sign-in view is bound to the same state, which is show modal from the onboarding view. And thanks to that, we can go back to sign-in view and we can control that state. So what's going to happen here is when there's success, I'm going to set again another dispatch queue, and this time I'm going to wait 4 seconds. So async after deadline now plus 4, execute, set show modal to false, and that's it. Now keep in mind that the dismiss animation is only going to work from the onboarding view. So we're going to preview that from here. Let's play and then trigger the modal. Then we can test the animation, also enter something and get a success The success is going to play, then the confetti, and it's going to dismiss. We're just missing the with animation in order to get that proper transition at the end. So we can do with animation curly braces and put show modal inside. That's it. Let's give it one final test. And here I'm going to enter something, sign in, check animation, confetti, and then the nice transition for dismiss. Cool. So that takes care of the onboarding view and the sign-in view. Before we move on to the next section, which is going to be about the home view and the side menu, we're going to organize our files first. I'm going to put the sign-in view and onboarding view inside a folder. So selecting these two, new group from selection, I'm going to call this views. Then extensions, custom text field, and custom font, I'm going to put this, again, new group from selection inside styles. And voila. So in the next series of videos, we're going to take care of the home view as well as the side menu, the tab bar with animated icons, then do a really nice 3D transition. So I'll see you in the next section. In this section, we're going to learn how to create a tab bar using animated icon from the single file. And this time we're going to change the artboard and deal with a list of data and loop through that to trigger the proper animation. The Rive asset that we're going to use is from the community, and we have multiple animations, multiple icons. We're going to open that in Rive. So as you can see, we have the presentation here and the different artboards. Now each of them have their own animations as well as state machine, which is going to allow us to trigger their own animation. So using this file, you'll need to download for newest runtime, and then in Xcode, you'll import that file, which is already present in the template. So let's start by creating a new file, and swiftui view, tab bar is going to be the name, and then create. First, let's import Rive runtime. Then we'll start with a first icon. So Rive view model, parentheses, file name. It's called icons. So in the editor, we have the chat, and this is the artboard name, and we have the state machine name as well as the input name and the animation names. So this is pretty consistent across all the artboards. We're going to try to remember that convention when we create the list. Now let's set the state machine name, which is chat underscore interactivity. Then the artboard name, which is chat in caps. Let's not forget to set it as a view. So the asset itself is white on white. We're going to need a background for that. And we're going to put that inside in HTag. So embed in HTag. Then we'll add a background, which is the color background 2 from the assets. And I'm going to set that to opacity 0.8. Now let's play this. And for now, it doesn't have the animation because we need to play it. But you can see that I can target the artboard as well as the state machine. Next, we'll play the animation, and in order to do so, we need to declare the asset as a variable first. So let icon is equal to, then we can essentially cut this part and replace that with icon and paste that here. So with this, I'm going to need a button with an action. So embed first inside a button, set the action, and the label is the icon itself. Also try question mark icon dot set input. The input name is active as we remember, and the value itself is a Boolean, so we'll set it to true. With this, I tap on the button and it's going to start animating, and it's going to do so until I tell it to stop. So we're going to do that using dispatch queue.main.async after deadline and execute .now plus 1, so 1 second, and execute, press enter. Then we're going to stop it using try icon set input active again and set the Boolean to false. Now it's going to animate for 1 second and then stop, and that's perfect. So at this point, the real challenge is how do we loop through a list of icons and still manage to customize the state machine name as well as the artboard name. So in order to do that, we're going to need to set the data model. So struct tab item of type identifiable so that we can loop it. Then var id is equal to uuid, which is auto-generated. Then var icon, and it's going to be of type Rive view model. So essentially, we're going to store the view model, which is what we have stored here, inside the data. So let's set the data. Var tab items is equal to an array using square brackets. And then each item is going to use the data model. So tab item, parentheses, and we're going to set the icon. Now press enter, and we're going to initialize with the file name, which is always icons. State machine, again, using chat, interactivity, then artboard name, chat in caps. So we're going to need 4 more items, and you can just copy and paste from the text content or do it yourself one by one by respecting the names. So I'm just going to replace the data like this. And again, I'm just adding search, timer, bell, and user. Awesome. Now let's take care of the loop. So here we have the button. Let's command click that and use repeat. As a result, it's going to show you 5 items. Now we're going to replace that with tab items, which is what we declared as an array. So each of them right now is using the one that we declared earlier, but we're going to replace that using the data from the loop. So it's going to be item.icon. And again, item.icon and item.icon. Perfect. So now we have 5 different icons, and each of them have their own animations, which is awesome. So thanks to the power of Rive, you can see that I can use artboards, state machines, animation, and a clever way to use data to loop through that and customize each of them and set the animation. This is not possible or would be very, very difficult using multiple assets in any other tool. So what we're going to do next is to set the styling. Starting with the padding before the background is going to be padding 12. Then the background is using opacity, and underneath that I'm going to use background blur. So background ultra thin material. I want to have rounded corners, so I'm going to use a mask, rounded rectangle, corner radius and style, 24 continuous. Next, I want to align all of this to the very bottom with a little bit of spacing. So the H stack, command click on it, embed in V stack, and right before the H stack, I'm going to use a spacer. Now I just need to make sure that my icon is not taking the full width and height. So I'm going to add a frame to the item.icon view. It's going to have a width of 36 and a height of 36. But if I still want to have a max width, I can just remove the width. Awesome. Let's add a little bit of padding to the left and right. So right after the mask, I'm going to set a padding horizontal of 24. And I also want to add a little bit of drop shadows. So before the padding, I'm going to set a shadow, the color, background 2, with the opacity of 0.3, radius 20, x 0, and y 20. Now in the design, we have a little bit of a border, so we're going to add that. Let's use overlay and rounded rectangle, corner radius and style, 24, style continuous. And then I'm going to apply a stroke on that rounded rectangle and customize the stroke by using linear gradient using colors. So we have an array of colors starting with dot white, dot opacity 0.5, then comma, dot white, dot opacity 0. Start point, top leading, end point, bottom trailing. Great. Then we can just customize this a little bit. So for the buttons, which is the content, I'm going to cut this and create a code section called content. Now we just need to declare that. So var content of type SumView, curly braces, and then paste the for each loop. Now typically I like to have my structure here and containers. And especially when you have a lot of indentation, you want to have your own code section to keep things a lot cleaner. So to test what we've done so far, you can see that we can tap each of these icons and they're going to play for 1 second. The styling is done. In this part, we'll learn about tab bar selection so that we have this little animation for the line, a little bit of styling, and also you're going to be able to change the view underneath when you change the selection. Back in Xcode, the first thing we're going to do is to list the different items in the selection. So let's create an enum tab of type string. And here we're going to have a case for each. The first one is going to be chat, then search, case timer, case bell, then case user. With this list right here, we're going to attach that to the tab item data model. So right after var icon, we're going to set var tab of type tab, which is the enum. Next, for the actual data, we're going to add the tab selection tab dot chat and then comma tab dot search comma tab dot timer comma tab dot bell and finally comma tab dot user. So the tab bar selection is going to be stored inside a state. So right before icon, I'm going to set state var selected tab of type tab. And then with this type, we're going to be able to set a default tab item. So I'm going to set it to chat by default. Next, we're going to make sure that when we tap on the button, it's going to change the tab selection. First, with animation, because we want to have a transition, and then selected tab, which is a state, to item.tap, which is from the data that is attached to each item. Now that the data and the state are set, I'm going to first enable the preview. So selecting here canvas. So let's go to the item icon. This is a view and we're going to set the opacity first. So dot opacity, and when the selected tab is equal to item.tab question mark 1, otherwise 0.5. What this means is that when the item is selected, it's going to have full opacity, otherwise 0.5. Then we're going to set the little line above that view. So dot background, and I'm going to use a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 2. Now the frame is going to have a height of 4. I'm also going to move this to the top portion so I can use a V-stack and a spacer after. Then on that rounded rectangle, I can use an offset Y of -4 to push up a little bit more. And going back to the frame before the height, I'm going to set it to 20. So this is the styling so far, but we only want to show this when it's selected. So using the same code, I'm going to use opacity, then selected tab is equal to item.tab question mark 1, otherwise 0. So now it's only visible when selected. Let's play this and take a look at the animation. Right now it's only using opacity. I can also add a size animation, so we can play with the width. So selected tab is equal to item.tab question mark 20, otherwise 0. So like this, it's also going to change the size. Now, if you're wondering about the color of the tab line, that comes from the accent color, which is in the assets. So if you look at the accent color, it's going to take this, especially when it's tinted, for example, inside a button. So if you want to change that color, you can always do it from here, or you can set the fill color for the shape, for example, pink, and it's going to change the color. But otherwise, because it's inside a button, it tends to tint it, and it's using color.accent color. Next, we're going to deal with the selected view underneath. So for that, you want to set that at the root view where you're going to include the tab bar. You don't necessarily want to put that in the tab bar view. So we're going to move to the content view. And there are two ways to go about this. The first way, which is to use binding, but there's also another way which is easier, and it's called app storage. Now, app storage is going to be persistent, meaning that when you close the app, it's also going to remember, and that is typical for a tab bar. So that's a good thing. This is very similar to the state, so I'm gonna set app storage, parentheses, and then the name is selected tab. Declare the variable, which is selected tab, of type tab is equal to chat by default. As you know, with binding, you have to pass it down when you include the view, but with app storage, you just need to make sure that you're referencing the same app storage name. So going back to tab bar, I can just replace the state by app storage, and now I'm going to reference the same name, which is selected tab. Therefore, the two are now synchronized. Awesome. Using that, I'm going to be able to change the content. First of all, let me put the text inside a Z stack. Then let me just remove the padding and change the name, which is going to identify each view. So for example, this is going to be chat. And right after the text, I'm going to include the tab bar. So now I have my tab bar on top. Now for showing the content, I can use something like an if statement. So for example, if selected tab is equal to chat, then it's going to show this text, otherwise another text. But since we have multiple options, I'm going to use the switch instead. Switch selected tab, and now I can use the beautiful auto completion, which gives me all of those options for me. I just need to replace the content. So chat, just put the text chat, and I'm going to paste for each of them by only changing the name. So search, timer, bell, and user. Let's play this, and now you're going to see that it's functional. Keep in mind that the text element is a view and it can be replaced by another view such as onboarding view, and it's going to show the appropriate view. I can do the same with the search by referencing the sign-in view. So I'm just going to put it back to the text, and that's how you manage the tab bar as well as the app storage and the content that would change as a result of the selected item. Now in the next section, I want to show you how to animate this hamburger menu, which is going to transition from the lines to a close button inside Rive. And I think it's going to be really fun. So I'll see you in the next section. In this part, we're going to create an icon animation in Rive. So we have these three lines and it's going to turn into a close icon. Now let's go to the Rive editor and create a new file. Let's set the artboard to 44 by 44 and then create. So we're going to do everything from scratch. Since it's a super simple icon and it's also very common for most icons in iOS, I'm going to name the file menu button. The artboard, let's name it menu. Then set the artboard fill to a transparent background. Then let's start by creating a circle, pressing O, just like in Figma. I'm going to set the size to 36 by 36. The X and Y position 22 and 22. This circle is going to have a white background. And now we're going to draw the three lines. By pressing R, we draw a rectangle. Then I'm going to set the size to 20 by 2, position 22, and Y 16. Let's not forget the rounded corner, set it to 1. Then the fill to black, so 0, 0, 0. It's going to give us that color. With this done, we can draw the second line, and to save time, we can just duplicate it, Command D. Then move it at the bottom, so roughly at the position 22 by 28. And let's duplicate it again, this time moving to the center at 22 by 22. And the width, we're going to change it to 12. Now, I'm just going to align this to the left, like this. So position 18 and Y22. That's it. Let me just name correctly. So we have the order, and the first line is going to be line 1, then line 2, then the middle one, line 3. With these 4 elements, we're ready to animate. So we're going to go to animate mode. Now I'm going to change the duration. Instead of 1 second, I'm going to set it to half a second. So the last 2 numbers is going to be 30. And then I'm going to rename the animation to open. Now let's select the first line. And this is where we're going to animate the Y position as well as the rotation. I'm going to move the time to 30. And I'm going to set the rotation to 45. Now, after that, I need to make sure that we have a Y of 22 so that it's roughly centered. Now, the rotation can go this way, or it can also go the opposite way. And so I'm going to use minus 45 instead. And I think this looks a little bit better. And I'm going to do the same with line 2. So starting at time 0, again, we're going to animate the Y position as well as the rotation, and then move to the end. This is where we're going to set 45 instead, and also 22 in terms of Y. So it should look a little bit like this. So this is one way to animate it, and there are just many variables that you can change to get different results. So for example, I can start here for the line 2, instead of 0, set it to 180. So it's exactly the same position, but kind of reversed. And when I animate, you can see that it's completely different the way it rotates. So again, those are the variables that you can play yourself. Now for the line 3, I want to make it disappear. It's going to go behind one of these two sticks. Let's go back to time 0, and I'm going to animate the X position as well as the rotation. Let's go to the end position, and I'm going to change this to 22 to be centered. Then the rotation to 45, and it looks a little bit like this. I can also try minus 45. It's really up to you. Now, another thing that I can do is when I press, the circle is going to scale down a little bit. So let's select the circle and set the aspect ratio, then enable the scale for both X and Y, and then move to frame 10, set it to 80, move to frame 30, set it back to 100. So now we have roughly this. For the animation timing, I'm going to select every single shape, then apply a cubic animation. Now it looks a little bit better, but also I can change it to bounce a little bit. So for example, I can move the first dot to be roughly to the far left in the middle, and the second dot I can go roughly above the gray line here. So that gives my bounce back effect. Now you can definitely use the numbers that I have here, but I definitely suggest playing with those values, and also check out Cubic Bezier, where you can find the different animation timings, such as the standard ease in, ease out, and ease in out. Next, we're going to take care of the opposite animation, which is the close animation. So I'm going to right click on open, duplicate it, rename it to close, and this is where I'm going to reverse the animation. So let me move the first keyframes roughly here for now, and the end keyframes I'm going to move at the very first. So with that, I can now freely move the first frame to the end. And like that, I'm going to be starting with the cross, then animate to the triple lines. So this is the opposite. So it's important to have these two animations so that now I can show you how to create the state machines and compose the flow of the animation and change those using a value such as Boolean or a trigger. So to add a state machine, we're going to add a new animation, but instead of animation, it's going to be a state machine. For first-time users, this is going to be a little bit confusing. You don't really know what to do. So the key things here are the entry, but also you have to drag the states that you have created. So this is super important, and now you can compose your state machine. The second thing that is not super obvious is that when you mouse over each of these states, you can drag it to create a direction. So entry is when it starts, and then the arrow expresses the condition to where it should go. Now this condition is based on a value. If you don't have any value, you can't really set any condition at all. So you're going to need to create an input. So I'm going to click on the plus sign here. Your input can be a number, a Boolean, or a trigger. Let's create a Boolean. Now the Boolean is true or false. And since this is going to be synchronized with swiftui, I'm going to name this is open. So thanks to this condition, I can go back to this little arrow between these two states, and I can click on the plus sign next to conditions, and I can find the value, and that says that if is open is true, then it's going to go to open state. Now I'm going to change this to false instead, because my is open state means that if the menu is open or not. And by default, the menu is not open. So when the menu is not open, it's going to go from the 3 dots to the close. So that's exactly what I want. But what about the close state? Well, from the entry, I can also add another arrow. And for this one, I'm going to set the condition if is open is equal to true, which means if the menu is open, then proceed to the close animation of the menu. So let's test this by clicking on the play button right here. As you can see, when the menu is not open, it's going to animate to the X. Now we can also play with the value as we're composing the state machine. So for example, I can enable is open, but right now it's stuck, so I'm gonna have to stop and enable it from here and then play again. So you can see that if this is true, then it's gonna go to the close animation. If we don't want to be stuck, and this is where the composition of the animation comes in, we can always create an arrow between each of those states. So from close to open and from open to close. So selecting from open to close, I'm going to set the condition if is open to true, and vice versa, from close to open, I'm going to set is open to false. Let's restart the animation and set is open to false, and then we can play. So you can see it goes to the open animation. If we toggle is open, you can see it just switch back and forth, which is really nice because then you're not stuck at all. So on a basic level, that's how you compose your state machine. You have your entry, and then you have your animations, which are states, and then you set your condition for the value that you want your users to input, which can also serve as a state that is synchronized to swiftui, for example. And then based on this value that can change over time, it's gonna go to the appropriate animation. And we're gonna see that in action in swiftui. Before we go, we can change the state machine name. Typically, you can leave it to state machine 1, but in my case, I'm gonna change it to just state machine. Now, it's important to mention that having the right name will make or break your Rive asset. So make sure to be well synchronized there. I'm going to export this file by downloading for newest runtime. Notice that when you export, the name becomes all in lowercase and the space that you have in your name becomes an underscore. Back in Xcode, you should import that file. It's gonna be menu_button. And in content view, I'm going to import Rive runtime. Then right after app storage, I'm going to declare my button. So let button is equal to Rive view model, starting with the file name, which is menu_button. Then I'll set the state machine name, which is state machine without 1, comma. The animation name, I'll start with open. Next, I'm going to scroll down a little bit, and right before tab bar, I'm going to put button.view. So let's play this, and you're going to see that the animation runs by default. So another thing you can do is to simply make the autoplay to false, and we can change that right before animation name to autoplay false, comma. Like this, at the beginning, it's not going to animate anything, which is exactly what we want. Then we can create an event. So for the button, typically you can wrap that inside a button, but you can also, if you don't want the opacity animation, to use untap gesture. So I'm going to put try ? Button set input, and the input name is open, and the value I can set it to true. Now this is just for testing, but you can see that the animation runs. We just need to set the state correctly. So after app storage, I'm going to set a state var is open is equal to false by default, which means that the menu is not going to be open initially. Then using this state, let's replace the value for the button to is open. And also, we're going to toggle that value when we tap. So is open, toggle. What this means is that at the beginning, the menu is not open, and that's going to be synchronized to the Rive asset. And also when we tap, it's going to switch back and forth between true or false. As a result, when I click here, it should animate to the close, when the menu is open, and then when we're closing the menu, it switches back to the hamburger menu, and so back and forth. Now before we go, we can style the button itself, and I'm going to start with a frame with a width of 44 and height of 44. I also want to add a drop shadow, but before that, I'm going to use mask and use a circle shape. We don't see it because it's white on white, so I'm going to add a shadow color, which is shadow, with opacity 0.2, the radius 5 x 0 y 5. Now we see the circle properly, and it does work as well. Next, I want to move the button to the top left of the screen, so I'm going to add a frame modifier using max width infinity, max height infinity, then alignment to top leading. Then I'll add some padding so that it doesn't hug too much the borders. And with that, our menu animation is done. And then later on, we can work on the site menu animation. In this part, we're going to build this layout here from scratch. It has two types of components. First, the vertical cards and the horizontal cards here. Now we have a lot of data, so to avoid being too repetitive, I prepared the files for you. You can just go to Xcode and drag and drop the model folder, and I'm going to put that right after style. Just make sure that it's right next to it and not inside it. So copy items if needed, create groups, and add to targets. And there we go, we have these two files. Now to explain what they are, we've done this multiple times in the past. So we have the identifiable and the data structure, as well as the sample data for the course sections. Likewise, for the course, we have the data model and the data. So let me close this, and I'm going to create a new file. So right click on tab bar, new file, swiftui view. I'm going to name this one vcard and create. So the first thing is to reference the data var course of type course. Then we're going to set the default data for the preview. So course is equal to courses, and that is from my sample data. Then set square brackets, and then we can use 0 for the first item. Next, I'm going to start with the text, and it's going to use the data course.title. Then I'll use the custom font .title2. Let me put this into a frame which has a max width of 170. And when you have multiple lines, you want to set the alignment to leading. Otherwise, you might have some extra space. So the layout looks like this, and we have two more texts as well as these avatars and this icon. Let me put the text inside a VStack, and I'm going to set the second text, course.subtitle, opacity 0.7, then a third text, course.caption. Then this string is going to be uppercased, so all caps. Let's not forget the custom font. So for the second text, I'll set it to subheadline. And for the third text, I'll use .footnote2. I want to have some spacing between the elements, so going to the VStack, first I'll use alignment to leading, then the spacing is 8. Let's take care of the card container. I'm going to add a padding of 30. Then I'll set the background using a linear gradient. And here, a nice trick is that you can use the same color by playing with the opacity. Now from my data model, thankfully I do have a color for each card. So it's course.color, then comma, course.color.opacity 0.5. The starting point is top leading and endpoint bottom trailing. So now I have a nice background by using the same color and opacity. Let's deal with the rounded corners. I'm going to use mask, rounded rectangle, corner radius and style 30 and continuous. Then I'm going to add a drop shadow with the same color as the card. So thankfully we have the course color. I can use that. So shadow and course.color.opacity 0.3, radius 8, then 0, then 12. Then I'm going to add a second drop shadow, which is very similar. So I can copy this shadow modifier and using the same color, but this time is going to have a radius of 2 and y of 1. For the image in the top right, I can use .overlay. Then I have my data, which is course.image. So it's right here. And I'm going to set my indentation. Then using the frame, I'm going to push it to the top right by using max width .infinity, max height .infinity, then alignment to top trailing. Let's add some padding of 20. Perfect. Next, we're going to deal with these avatars. But the thing is, we have a set of images that we have here, but we want to be able to randomize them as to not look too repetitive. So we're going to have to script that accordingly. So looking at the assets catalog, you can see we have avatars from 1 to 6. What we're going to do is to create a loop and randomize the number between 3 numbers. But first, let's start with a single image, and it's called avatar 1. So I'm going to make this resizable and set a frame of width 44, height 44. Then I'll mask this using a circle. So now I can loop this by doing repeat. It's going to create 5 instances. And instead of making this part of the V stack, I'm going to make this part of an H stack. So embed in H stack. Now let's set this indentation, and we want to have 3 images instead of 5. And then we want to randomize the data. What I'm going to do here is create an array, so square brackets, and I'm going to use the numbers 4, 5, and 6. Now, because the data doesn't have an ID, we're going to have to set ID to /self. And so each value that we're getting is the number itself. Now we can replace the item name by number. So as a result, inside the double quotes, we can just insert the number. Right now it's not randomized, so after the square brackets, we can use .shuffled. And so every time that we press space, it's going to refresh, and you can see that it's randomized. Another thing that we want is to use an offset to be able to put the subsequent avatars on top of the previous ones. So for that, I'm going to need an index value. In order to get the index value, I'm going to need to set the array to .enumerated, and selecting everything before the comma, I'm going to put that inside parentheses and use array. Additionally, instead of self, I'm going to use offset this time. And instead of number, I'm going to get the index as well as the number. So the difference between the index and the number is that the index is going to start with 0, 1, 2, versus the number is the actual content of the array, so 4, 5, and 6 randomized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the index value, which again is 0, 1, and 2. I'm going to set .offset, and using the exposition, I'm going to use the index value, which is an integer, and multiply that by -20. It's going to complain that it needs a CG float for the offset, so you need to convert that. Click on fix, and it's going to do that for you, meaning wrapping the values inside parentheses, and then use CG float. So just to reiterate, the first avatar has index 0, so 0 multiplied by 20 is 0, and then multiplied by 1 is 20, then -40 and 60, etc., as long as we have more index values. But in this case, we only have 3, and that does exactly the job that I want. Lastly, I'm going to push the content by using a spacer, and then I'm going to set a frame with a width of 260 and height of 310. Now, sometimes you're going to see that you have some extra space, and that's because SwiftUI likes to take the minimum size possible. And to fix that, you're going to need to make sure that one of the elements is going to use the full space. And especially when you have multiple lines of text, you can definitely apply that. In this case, we're going to use the course.title. I'm going to set a frame max width infinity, and then align that to .leading. Perfect. Now the text content itself, we can change everything to white. So I'm going to use foreground color on the V stack, and it's going to apply to every single element automatically, which is neat. So foreground color to white, And also in my preview, I can test the different data by changing the index value. So you can see 1, 2, as long as the data exists. Now we do have a problem here, which is that the title itself doesn't have priority over the subtitle. So one thing you can do is to apply to the title layout priority to 1. As a result, the title is going to take priority over the subtitle. The subtitle is going to use ellipse when needed, especially when we have a long title. All right, so let's deal with the horizontal card, which is much simpler. As you can see, we have less elements. Let's create a new file, swiftui view hcard. Again, I'm going to start with the data, and this time is going to be var section of type course section. Then we're going to set the default data for the preview, and we're going to use course sections, square brackets, and the first index value. Now the text, I'm going to change that to section.title. Let me set this to the custom font to title 2. Then I'm going to add another text, and I need to put that inside a vstack first. So text section.caption. The custom font is body. Now for the vstack, alignment to leading, and the spacing, I'm going to set it to 8. Then I need an image to the right. So selecting the vstack, I'm going to embed in hstack, and after the vstack, I'll set the section.image. In between the two elements, let's set a divider, parentheses. And now we have the line. We just need to set the container properly. So I'm going to set first a padding of 30 with a frame of max width dot infinity and max height 110. Then the background is going to be section.color. I will also set the foreground for the text.white. Then the rounded corners using mask rounded rectangle, corner radius 30, style continuous. Now I want to make sure that my title, which can have multiple lines, is going to take the maximum space, pushing the image to the far right. So let's go to the title and add a frame using max width dot infinity and alignment to leading. Then I want to add some more space between the elements. So for the H tag, set a spacing of 20. Now let's give it a test using another index value, and it looks pretty good. Great, now that we have the components, it's going to be fairly easy to stitch things together into a cohesive layout. So back to Xcode, let me right click on tab bar and create a new view. SwiftUI view, home view is going to be the name. Then I'm going to start with the title. So this is going to be courses, and I'm going to use the custom font that is large title. Let's push this to the left by using a frame, max width infinity, alignment to leading. Let me just add some padding, but only horizontal, set it to 20. Next, the whole layout is going to be inside a vstack. So command click on the text itself, embed in vstack, fix the indentation. Let's start by including a vcard, parentheses. The course, let's take that from the sample data and using the index 0, and voila. Now command click on the vcard and click on repeat to loop. Then use actual data, so courses, replace item by course, and replace the content by course. Boom, we have all the cards, and we're gonna make this scroll horizontally. So let's embed this inside a scroll view. Then the scroll view is going to be dot horizontal. Then for the cards to work, I just need to make sure to wrap this inside an H tag. Let me just add some padding to the H tag of 20. Now the thing is, the scroll view tend to clip the content. You might need to add some extra padding. In this case, at the bottom, we're gonna add 10. In between the cards, we can also control the spacing by changing for the H tag, so spacing of 20. Let me just play this and show you that when you scroll, it works, but we do have the indicator here. So we can definitely set shows indicator to false, and voila. Now the spacing between the elements inside a vstack or H tag tend to have a default, and sometimes it takes a lot of space. So I'm gonna set the spacing to 0. Next, let's take care of recent with the horizontal cards. So after the scroll view, I'm going to set the title using a text, recent, custom font, title 3. And here, since I have multiple elements, I can also use alignment from the VStack, set it to leading. So it's going to push everything to the left against each other. I just need to have some padding horizontally to 20. Next, let's set the H cards. So H card, parentheses section, course sections, using the index value of 0. Now we have the first card, and we're going to repeat this using repeat, then use the data course sections, and each item is going to be called section. Now we're going to pass that data to the H card section. Specifically for the H cards, I'm going to wrap this inside a VStack, then set a spacing of 20. Also, the VStack, I'm going to set a padding of 20. Perfect. Now all that's left is to set the scrolling for the entire screen and also a custom background color. Let me select the VStack container of everything and embed that inside a ZStack. Also, to keep the structure easy to follow, I'm going to cut the whole VStack and name that content, and also create the code section for it. So var content of type SumView, curly braces, then paste that VStack. Cool. Now this content, which is the whole VStack, I'm going to put that inside a scroll view. So embed first, scroll view, and there you go. We have the scrolling. For the custom background, it's going to be underneath the scroll view. So before the scroll view, set color, and we already have an asset color for that called background. It's off-white, and we need to ignore the save area. So ignore save area. Great. Now let's finish everything by including that inside the content view, because right now it's set to the chat as a text. Now instead of that, I'm going to set home view, parentheses. As a result, now we have the home view underneath the hamburger menu as well as the top bar. We do have issues with the spacing at the top and bottom, and especially when we start scrolling, you can see that the scroll overlaps with the navigation area as well as the tab bar area. So to fix this, we need to use something called save area inset, and we need to apply to all the views. So I'm going to put everything inside a group so that all of these views will have that applied to it. So after group, now I can set save area inset, starting with the bottom. So edge bottom, and the content, just press enter. So here I'm going to create a clear color to create some spacing, and it's going to have a frame with a height of 80. So as a result, you can see that my scrolling stops here, and I also have some extra space when I scroll. Let's add another save area inset for the top. So save area inset, this time top, content, press enter, color.clear.frame, and height of 104. Now we do have some extra space, and that's because of the save area. So let's ignore the save area as well. And now it's pretty much perfect. The same with the spacing here, and everything else works just fine, including the hamburger menu and the tab bar. In this part, we'll focus on the side menu. So we're going to build a basic layout, and also we're going to animate each of these icons using a single Rive asset. Now in Xcode, we're going to create a new file, and it's going to be a swiftui view. We're going to call this one side menu, create. So let's start with this portion with the name and the job, as well as the SF symbol icon. So I'll start with my name. You can definitely put your own name. So this is going to use the custom font body. I'm going to put this inside a VStack, add another text, again using my job, which is a UI designer, but feel free to change yours. Then the custom font is subheadline. This is a secondary text, so I'll set the opacity to 0.7. Now feel free to use secondary color as well. Just keep in mind that secondary color tends to be more gray versus opacity can adapt a little bit better with different color background. The only exception is when you use material blur and secondary color can have some vibrancy. Next, I will set the alignment to leading and spacing to 2. For the content, it's already set up in the curly braces. Then I'll put the V stack inside an H stack, so embed in H stack, and before the V stack, I'm gonna set image, system name, and person. This icon right here, I'm gonna add a padding of 12, and the background is going to be white with an opacity of 0.2. Now you can't really see white on white, so we're gonna deal with that a little bit later, but since we've done this multiple times, I'm just gonna add a mask using a circle. And now we're gonna take care of the background. So the H stack is only for this portion, and I'm gonna embed inside a V stack. So this is going to take care of the rest of the layout. Now I'm gonna set the background color. So background color, I can use a hex color because I haven't saved that inside the color assets. So I'm gonna go to Figma, then I'll select the artboard and go to the fill. Now I'm just gonna get this color code right here and paste here. So by default, it's taking the minimum size, which means that I should set a frame before that, and I'm gonna set max width to 288 and max height to infinity. Great. Because I have a dark background, I'm gonna set all the foreground text to white. So using foreground color is going to apply to every single text. Then let me add the round corners. So mask, rounded rectangle, corner radius 30, style continuous. Then I'm gonna align the box to the left by using a frame, max width, dot infinity, alignment to leading. So the way that I set this up is kind of optional. In reality, I could have just created a full background, but I did it this way so that if I want to change the animation of the side menu and just made it slide from the left, this layout still works. So it's kind of more flexible. Next, I'm going to push this row here to the left. So I'm going to add a spacer right inside the H stack, but after the V stack. Then my H stack is going to have some padding, which by default is 16. I'm also going to push everything to the top. So I'm going to use a spacer after the H stack. Awesome. That's it for the main layout. Now we're going to add the rows, which includes the animated icons. So the first thing I'm going to do is to import the Rive runtime. Then I'm going to declare an icon. So let icon is equal to Rive view model, parentheses, the file name is icons. Now we've made the tab bar before, so we're going to reuse the same icons. And there are actually more icons than the one that we have used so far. So that's useful for the sidebar. Now let me go back to the side menu. And as we've done the tab bar before, we're gonna set the state machine, which is home underscore interactivity. And then the artboard name is home in caps. So with the icon declared, we can show the view right after the H stack. So icon.view. And voila. Let me just set the size by setting the frame width 32, height 32. Sometimes the Rive asset is not going to be visible until you play it. So we can do that. Then I'm going to set an opacity of 0.6. Now I'm going to put that next to a text. So I'm going to embed inside an H stack, add a text. This one is home. And then the custom font is headline. Now let me fix the indentation and also align my H stack. So frame, max width, dot infinity, alignment to leading, add some padding of 12. Then I'm gonna add a little divider here. And for that, I'm gonna embed the H stack inside a V stack. And right before the H stack, I'm going to set a rectangle, parentheses, then set a frame with a height of 1. This should be very subtle, so I'm going to add an opacity of 0.1 and add some padding that is only horizontal, which is by default 16. I also want to add some more spacing between the icon and the text. So for the H stack, I'm going to set a spacing of 14. Then the V stack itself, I'm going to add a padding of 8. Now, what I'm trying to do here is to roughly align the text so that it's easier to read. Next, since we have multiple menu lists, I want to add a title for each block. So before the VStack, I'm going to set a text, parentheses, browse in caps, and this is going to use a custom font subheadline 2. Then I'll set the frame with a max width dot infinity alignment leading with a little bit of padding, which is horizontal 24. So I'm trying to align the browse and the divider and also the icon. Now, when you have multiple icons, they don't always have the same spacing, the same size. So in order to have some consistency, each of them need to have some sort of a box, and that's how you align the elements. So let me add some spacing at the top. So padding top 40. Then I'm going to add an opacity of 0.7. Great. So now I'm going to add a tap gesture so that when I select each of the menu items, it's going to start animating the icon. And for that, we're going to use the H tag, which is the entire row, to set the untap gesture. So to trigger the animation, we're going to set try icon.setInput, and the input name is active and the value is true. So as a result, when we tap here, it should start the animation. It's barely visible, but it's there. Now, just like the tab bar, we're going to stop the animation after 2 seconds, and we're going to use dispatch queue.main.async after using deadline and execute. So deadline, which is now, plus 2 seconds, and execute, press enter. Then we can do again using try icon.setInput active, and the value is going to be false. So if we do that, then the animation, instead of looping over and over, it's going to stop after 2 seconds. So now that we have a single row, and I typically like to start with a single item for that to be perfect first, kind of like a component, and then afterwards I'm going to work on the data. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So let's set the data model struct menu item of type identifiable so that we can loop. Then var id is equal to uuid, which is going to auto-generate the ID for each item. Then set the var text of type string. Var icon, we're going to store the Rive view model. Now we're going to create the array. So var menu items is equal to square brackets, then menu item, parentheses, and we're going to set the text and icon. So the first one is going to be home. Now for the Rive view model is essentially the same as here, but also we're going to have multiple items. Since this is quite repetitive, I'm just going to copy and paste from the text content. So we have the code here. The first one is home, icons, the state machine name, and the artboard. So these are used to specify the state machine name and artboard for each icon. So we have search, we have like, and we have chat. Now, thanks to this, I'm going to go back to the H tag as well as the divider, which is a rectangle. And I'm going to command click on the H tag first to use repeat. Then the for each is going to use the data that I just created, which is menu item. And for each item, I'm going to replace the icon first and also during the untap gesture. So item.icon, item.icon. Also, let's replace the text. So item.text. Additionally, we want to have the divider between each rows. So I'm going to move the rectangle to be inside the for each loop. Lastly, for the VStack, I want to reduce some spacing between the items. So I'm going to set alignment to leading and spacing to 0. For the content, I can just delete that. In this part, we're going to take care of the rest of the side menu, including the selection state and animation, as well as the other list and the dark mode toggle. Going to the side menu file, I'm going to scroll down at the very bottom to set the selection. Let's start with the enum selected menu of type string, curly braces, and now we're going to create a case for each of the menu items. So case home, case search, case favorites, case help, case history, case notifications, and case dark mode. Now we're going to connect this selected menu to the menu item. So var menu of type selected menu. Then for the data, we're going to add the missing information. So let's fix this, and this is going to be .home. Let's fix all of them first, and we're going to apply .search, then .favorites, and .help. Great. With this, we can go and set up the state for each. So let me add that before the icon. So state var selected menu of type selected menu, and we're going to set .home by default. So we're going to need an event, and we already have one, which is the untap gesture for the H stack. And right at the end, we're going to set with animation, curly braces, then set selected menu is equal to item.menu that we're receiving from the loop. So we're updating the state to each item that we're receiving from the loop specific to the menu. With the state covered, now we're going to add the background. Right after padding, I'm going to set a background. And if you set the blue, it looks a little bit like this. But since I want to have rounded corners, I'm going to use a rounded rectangle, corner radius and style, which is 10, continuous. Then I'll set the fill, since this is a shape, to blue. Now I want to make sure that if the menu item is not selected, it's going to have a width of 0. So I'm going to set a frame because I'm going to use that as an animation, and I'm going to set max width to 0. And when I do that, everything is hidden, but I only want the selected item to show the maximum possible width. So if selected menu is equal to item.menu, question mark, dot infinity, meaning that it's going to take the full width, otherwise set it to 0. Now you can see that when I tap on each of these menu items, it's going to animate, but right now it's from the center. And what I'm going to do is to set the frame to the rounded rectangle, set the max width to infinity, then alignment to leading. Like this, it's going to push the rectangle to the left. So you can see the animation starts from the left instead. Another thing that you're going to notice is that when I tap outside of the text or icon, it's not going to activate. And to fix that is to make sure that we have a background for the untap gesture, because this event depends on the content itself. And I'm going to add a second background. For example, if I set this to black, you're going to see that when I tap on the black portion, it's going to work. But I don't want black, so I'm going to use the exact same color as the background, and that is color background 2. As a result, my interaction works perfectly. Great, now we're going to deal with the other list. And since we're repeating the rows, so we're going to create a component for that. So let's command N to create a swiftui view. It's going to be called menu row. Now we're going to start by setting the data. So var item of type menu item. Then for the preview, we're going to have some default item. So item menu items, which is the array, and I'm going to use the first index value. Now for the content itself, we're just going to go back to the side menu and take the entire H stack, including the untap gesture. So let's cut all of this, and then we're going to reference menu row parentheses. Going back to the menu row, we're going to replace the text with that full H stack. Now we just need to make sure that the selected menu state is going to be synchronized with the side menu. So I'm going to need to create a binding. So binding var selected menu of type selected menu. With this binding, it's going to be required to set the constant for the preview. So we're going to set constant, and by default, it's going to be home. Likewise, from the side menu, when we include the menu row, we're going to need to set the data as well as the binding. So the data is from the item from the loop, and the binding is the state itself, but we need to add the $ in front. So this is a lot cleaner and shorter, and we can reuse pretty much the same code for history. But before that, we're going to create the data. And again, I'm just going to copy and paste from the text content because it's pretty much a repeat of this, but with different data. And so we have the menu 2 and the menu 3. So we have history, notifications, and then dark mode. Using that, we can essentially copy and paste the same as the text browse and the VStack, copy and paste all of that and just replace the content. So history, and instead of menu items for the data, it's going to be menu items 2. And voila. For the toggle, we can't really use exactly the same component, so we're going to have to improvise a little bit, starting with the state. So right after selected menu state, we're going to create a new state, var is dark mode. This is for the toggle, and I'm going to set it to false by default. Using this state, I'm going to go right after history, and I'm going to add the toggle first, parentheses. Using the title and the binding, the title is going to be nothing because the styling is custom, and the binding is going to be $ is dark mode. Now this is where we have the toggle. It's functional. We're just going to add the spacer before the toggle, and also we're going to create the text and icon to the left. First, we're going to put the toggle inside an H tag. Starting with the icon, we're going to use the array that we created, menu items 3, and it's going to be index 0 dot icon dot view parentheses. Then change the size by using frame, width 32, height 32, using opacity 0.6. For the H tag, let me just add a padding of 20. Then right after the icon and before the toggle, I'm going to add a text using again menu items 3, the first index value 0 dot text, and change the custom font to headline. Perfect. We're just going to add the spacing to 14 for the H tag. And then for the animation, when this toggle is active, we want to animate. And when it's inactive, we want to stop the animation. So it's a little bit different from the other menu items where when it's selected, it runs the animation for 2 seconds. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to put a modifier right after the icon using unChange. Now, unChange is going to listen to a state change, and based on the values, I'm going to be able to run functions. And in this case, we're going to run or not the animation. So the value that we're looking for is dark mode, and perform, press enter. Now we're going to receive a new value, which is the value of dark mode. And we're going to set a condition if new value is true, so curly braces, then use the menu items 3 index 0, which I'm going to copy and paste, then icon set input active to true. Else, then try question mark menu items 3 dot icon set input active, then value false. Now to reiterate, is dark mode is the state, which is a boolean, and we're going to receive that value. If the boolean is true, then play the animation, otherwise stop the animation. As a result, when I toggle, you can see that it starts playing the animation and it doesn't stop, it just keeps running. And when I disable, it's going to play it once and stop because it needs to reset to the first frame. And that's basically it. I just want to customize the animation timing a little bit for the selection blue. So going to the menu row, using the width animation, I can set dot timing curve. And here, remember, we can use the same values as in Rive editor. And we can also find that in cubicbezier.com. One of the values that I really like to use, and I keep remembering that, is 0.2, 0.8, 0.2, and then 1. Then we're going to go back to side menu and then test the animation. You can see that it's a lot faster. It has a bit of ease out, and I really like that timing curve value. Now in this part, we're going to take care of the sidebar animation. It's going to look a little bit like this. When we press on the hamburger menu, it's going to slide the side menu and also apply a 3D transform on the main view. So we're going to learn about the structure, the animation, the transition, and how to put everything together. Now, thankfully, before we already have set the isOpen state, and we're going to use exactly that to apply all the animation for the views. And remember that this state was used for the Rive asset to switch back and forth the icon animation. So the first thing we're going to do is to apply that before the ignore save area to the group itself, which is the main view here. And we're going to use rotation 3D effect using the angle and the axes. So the angle, we can use degrees, then set it to 30 for now. Now for the axis, you can play with the perspective on which axis you want to transform. So let's start with 0 for X, and then 1 for Y, and then 0 for Z. So it looks a little bit like this, and you can definitely play with the X value as well. Then set 0 for Y. So I'm just going to put it back to 1. But the thing is, I want to skew it towards the other direction, so I'm going to set Y minus 1, just like this. Now I want to take care of the rounded corners. So before the transformation, I'm going to apply a mask using a rounded rectangle, curly braces, corner radius 30, style continuous. Perfect. Then I want to move by using offset. So right after rotation, I'm going to set offset X to 265. And I'm also going to play with the scale. So scale effect, and it's going to be 0.9. So this is what I have so far. And thanks to this, we have enough space on the left to bring the side menu. So far, there's no animation, and it's not connected to the isOpen state. So we're going to do exactly that. Starting with the rotation 3D effect, I'm going to set isOpen question mark to 30, otherwise 0. Likewise for the offset, isOpen question mark 265, otherwise 0. And for the scale, isOpen question mark 0.9, otherwise 1. Perfect. Now we can tap on the button and it does the switching. And the reason for that is because we haven't set the animation timing yet using with animation. We're going to go to the button right here, and where it says isOpen toggle, we're going to wrap that inside with animation. And this time we're going to use the spring with response and damping. So the response is 0.5, damping 0.7, and blend duration, we don't need it, so we can delete that. And using the curly braces, we're going to wrap that with the state inside it. So testing this, you're going to see the beautiful animation, and it even has a bounce back thanks to the spring. You can definitely play with these values. So for example, the response is kind of the velocity at the beginning. So if you set it to 0.3, it's going to bounce even more and even faster. And the damping is how much it bounces at the end. So if I set it to 0.9, it's going to bounce less at the end. But if I set it to 0.3, it's going to bounce a lot at the end. Let me just put it back to 0.5 and 0.7. So it looks a little bit like this. And so far we have this animation. We just need to add the background and also the side menu animation. Let's go ahead and take care of the background. We're going to go to the Z stack and then add a color. And I'm going to use the background 2. So let me open the side menu in order to see that background. And we need to add .ignore save area. Running again, it works fine. Now we're going to take care of the side menu. So right after color, let's include side menu parentheses. As a result, it's right behind the main screen. We just need to move it a little bit, and also we need to move the close button. So first we're going to do a fade in using opacity. So isOpen question mark 1, otherwise 0. Then we're going to move from left to right. So we're going to use .offset using the X position, isOpen question mark 0, otherwise minus 300. And now we have something like this. It moves and it's really nicely synchronized. We're just going to add the rotation 3D effect as well. Rotation 3D effect degrees isOpen question mark 0, otherwise 30. Again, we're going to set the axes x0, y1, which is the opposite of the main view, and z0. Let's test it again, and voila, it does a really nice job at following the same consistency as the main view 3D rotation effect. Now let's go to the hamburger menu. So we're going to scroll down a little bit to find the button, and right before on tap gesture, I'm going to set offset x is open question mark 216, otherwise 0. So this is going to move the button right here so that I can easily close it and back and forth. Likewise, we also need to move the tab bar to make it hidden. So we're going to use the Y position this time. So offset Y is open question mark 300, otherwise 0. And boom, we have exactly all of the animations and it's working beautifully. So as you can see, playing with swiftui is really effortless in terms of how you want to set the animation, what kind of effects to use. In this case, we're using rotation 3D effect, but you can also use offset, opacity, rotation, scale, and of course, play with those values yourself to create the animation that you want. In this part, we're going to close all the loops. We're going to create this user button that is going to launch the onboarding view. And this is similar to the modal animation that you see in iOS, except that it's the other way around. So it comes from the top and the card stack at the bottom. So we're going to create the close button and also add a little bit of gradient underneath the tab bar, and finally animate the status bar so that we don't have a black status bar on the dark background. Now in Xcode, I'm going to go to the button, and right before it, I'm going to set an image system name, and I'm going to use the icon from SF symbol called person. Let me set the frame width 36, height 36. Then the background is going to be white. You can see the icon right here in the middle. Let's set the mask using a circle. Then I'm going to add a shadow using the color shadow with opacity 0.2, radius 5, x0, and y5. Next, we're going to move that to the top left, and we're going to use frame using max width infinity and max height infinity. Then alignment top trailing. Let me just add some padding, and there you go, we have the account button on the top right. I'm just going to make sure that it's well aligned with the other button, so I'm going to use offset y4. Now because of the side menu animation, I might want to add that when the side menu is open, so I'm going to set .offset x is open question mark 100, otherwise 0. Like this, it's going to hide it during the menu transition. So now we're going to take care of showing the onboarding view. We're going to start with a state right after is open state. Let's type state var show is equal to false by default. And then going back to the button, I'm going to add a tap gesture right after the shadow modifier. So on tap gesture, let's set width animation right away, and we're going to use spring. Now, if you don't set the response and damping, it's just going to have the default values. And then I'm going to set show to true. So right now it's not doing anything because we're not applying that to any modifier, to any view. So we're going to scroll down at the bottom right after tab bar, and we're going to set an if statement. If show curly braces, then we're going to show the onboarding view parentheses. Now we can test it out, and you can see that it's missing a background. So what we can do is add a background modifier to white. So this should fix it. We just need to take care of the transition. Instead of using the default opacity, we're going to use move with the edge to top. At the same time, it's very important, especially when you're using transition with something that goes on top, to set the Z index to 1. Otherwise, the transition out is not going to work fine. So we're going to take a look, and it looks a little bit like this. Now, it's important to remember that the transition in doesn't work fine in the preview. So if you want to test that, you're going to need to open the simulator instead. But before doing that, we need to remember to go back to the app file where we set the onboarding view as the default initial view. So we're going to need to change that back to content view because this is where the main app happens. So now I'm going to press play and then test my animation. It looks a little bit like this. And what is missing is that we need the rounded corners as well as moving the offset a little bit and have the view underneath to scale down a little bit and with rounded corners. So we're going to do those things. First, I'm going to set the offset using Y, and then I'm going to set show -10, otherwise 0. Now enabling the animation, you can see a little bit of offset here. Let me just add some rounded corners. So before the transition, I'm going to add a mask, rounded rectangle, corner radius to 30 and style continuous. And then I'm going to add a little bit of drop shadow, so shadow dot black dot opacity 0.5. The radius is 40, x0, y40. So if we enable the onboarding view, you can see that it looks a little bit like this. With a drop shadow, we might need to ignore the save area at the top. So right after drop shadow, let's do ignore save area dot all, comma, edges. I'm going to set it to top. Thanks to this, you can see that the top does not have a gap, but the bottom does. At the same time, I want to scale down the view underneath. Let's scroll up a little bit to find the group. And this is where I'm going to apply another scale effect next to the first scale effect to show -0.92 roughly, otherwise 1. So we're going to test this. The animation is working fine for the background view, but for the transition, we're going to need to test it in the simulator. We do have a problem with the tab bar, so we need to hide that. And I'm going to scroll down to the tab bar and add another offset modifier, then set the Y, show -200, otherwise 0. So this should hide the tab bar at the same time. You can also test the whole thing in a simulator and you can see it looks great. We're just missing a close button. So let's head to the onboarding view in the views folder. And this is where we're going to add the close button. But first, we're going to create the binding that is going to synchronize with content view. So at binding, var show of type Boolean. As a result, we need to have a default value for the preview. So we're going to set show.constant to true by default. Then finally, going back to content view, we're going to synchronize that for the onboarding view using show $show. With this binding, we can go back to onboarding view, then scroll back top to find the structure. And right after where we show the modal, we're going to put that button on top of everything. Let's start with the image using a system name, which is xmark for the close button. Then I'm going to set a frame with a width of 36 and a height of 36. Then a background is going to be black. Therefore, the foreground, which is the icon itself, is going to be white. Now let's make this into a circle using mask circle parentheses. Then finally a drop shadow using color.black, opacity 0.3, radius 10, x0, and y10. Now with the button, we're going to move that to the top right. But before that, we're going to put the whole image by command clicking on it, embed inside a button, then curly braces for the action, label for the button itself. Let's fix the indentation here. And for the button, we're going to set a frame, max width, infinity, max height, infinity, alignment, top, trailing. It needs to have some padding, so let's add a padding of 20. And also I want to move it down a little bit, so offset Y80. Great. While we're here, I also want to animate it from top to bottom when we summon the onboarding view. Now let's tap play and make sure that it works with the existing layout. And you can see that sometimes when we add something, we might want to hide that. So what I can do here is to set show modal -200, otherwise 80. So as a result, it's going to move up and hide. Great. Let's not forget to add the button action so that we close the onboarding view. I'm going to do that with animation, curly braces, and then show is equals to false. Now testing that in the simulator, I'm going to be able to show the onboarding view and then dismiss it. Cool. So we have a few things to do before we finish this course. The first is I want to add a little bit of a background behind the tab bar to create a nice fade. Now let's go back to content view, and where the tab bar is, I'm going to add a background, and this background is going to use a linear gradient parentheses, and then I'm going to select the colors. The first color is going to be color background, then set the opacity to 0, and then the comma, color background again. Then the start point is going to be top and the end point bottom. Now you can see that the background itself is the color of the background. Right now it's a little bit too big, so we're going to need to set, after the linear gradient, a frame with a height of 150. Then I want to use a frame to push this to the bottom using max height, infinity, alignment, bottom. So right now it's limiting to the save area. That's why it's not hiding the blue portion. What we need to do after the background modifier is to ignore save area. And because I'm ignoring save area, I'm going to need to use offset to push back to the top. So let's add a third offset using Y to -24. And now you can see that the blue portion has a little bit of a fade because of that background. Now, when you have a color or gradient on top of the content, oftentimes it's not going to be interactive. In fact, you can scroll here. It's not very obvious, but when you try to scroll and drag here, it's not working. So make sure that on the linear gradient, you add allows hit testing to false. And now you can drag from here and it's not going to be in the way. Okay, so another thing we should fix is the status bar. You can see that it's always black. And in order to fix this, unfortunately, we're going to have to use UIKit code, which is deprecated. But I'm sure in the future, you're going to be able to find a code that is not deprecated. But let me show you how to do it. The first thing we need to do is to change the info. And here we need to add another value next to information property list. Then it's view controller base status bar appearance. And the Boolean, set it to no. So this is going to allow us to change the status bar appearance in code. Now we're going to go back to content view and we're going to add a modifier on change pretty much anywhere, but I'm going to do that on the button so that it's more related to it. And I'm going to set on change, listening to the value is open, then perform, press enter. If this new value is true, then I'm going to use the code UI application.shared.set status bar style to light content, animated to true. And then let's do the else statement, and we can copy and paste the same code, only changing light content to dark content. And now we can test it in the simulator. So here you're going to see that when I go to the side menu, it changes to white, and when I close, it changes to black again. And that's basically it in terms of layout and animation. The final step that I want to do before finishing is to organize the files. That's always good to do every once in a while when you start having a lot of files. So for example, we have the H card, V card, and menu row. So we can command select, right click, new group from selection, and I'm going to set this to components. Then I'll move the home view to the views folder. And finally, I'm going to select content view, side menu, and tab bar, right click on it, new group from selection, and name this one to navigation. So now I have all the folders is neatly organized and everything we wanted to achieve in this course is complete. Now, a couple of things is that when we reorganize files, you might want to close them and open them again because they don't exist anymore. So you're going to need to reopen them. Also, sometimes during the course of development, you're gonna have these errors that you can't really fix. So if you don't understand what's going on, you can always click on diagnostics. And if you really don't understand why, the magic step is just to Command Q to quit Xcode and then open it back again. And there you go, everything is working back again. Now, I really hope that you had a blast doing this course with me. We learned so much together, creating a custom layout with icon animations using the amazing Rive tool. And I'm really thankful for them to sponsor this course so that I can give it to you for free. So make sure to give their tool a try because it's really awesome. And especially check out their community files, a lot of great animations that you can analyze for yourself. It works on any platform, not just for swiftui, but also for the web, for Android, for games. You're gonna learn a lot about animations, especially by checking their editor and how it's done. So we managed to build quite a lot together, including the background animation, the button animation, this form right here, as well as the error and the success animation. Now we have this beautiful confetti, and we managed to transition everything, take care of all the functionalities and the layout and the icon animation for the tab bar. So a lot of techniques in between. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give us a shout out on Twitter, on YouTube, and share it to your friends because it's totally free. And I'll see you in the next course. Thank you.